Farmers worry about their livelihoods as the policies of U.S. President Trump are expected to drive up costs.
Farmers Union reports the Trump administration's widespread tariffs are already causing a significant drop in the price of several crops.
We would have to cut back our production or, worst case scenario, shut down the farm.
Trump's tariffs are hurting U.S. agriculture. Some farmers still support them. Trump's trade wars harm farmers and taxpayers. $8 billion in U.S. farm export contracts have been put on ice in just 6 weeks. Meanwhile, America's elevators are bursting. Nationwide corn inventories just hit 4.64 billion bushels and soybeans 1.01 billion bushels, a combined 145 million metric tons, the fattest stockpile in more than a decade. Yet prices are cratering. On Chicago's Board of Trade, the July corn contract shattered its all-time floor this month, dragging Midwest cash prices perilously close to the $4 line that most growers need just to break even. And here's the gut punch. While U.S. grain sits idle, G7 customers from Tokyo to London are quietly inking multi-year deals with Canadian suppliers, locking in shipments well past 2025. If this were only a temporary blip, why rush into long-term pacts north of the border? Tonight, we unpack the sudden collapse of America's farm export machine, the maple leaf surge filling the vacuum, and above all, the question Wall Street can't price and Washington can't spin. Has the world lost faith in the U.S. agricultural supply chain? Stay with us. The numbers and the fallout are bigger than you've been told. That unanswered silence from Washington sets the stage for what happened next. On 17 June 2025, President Trump boarded Air Force One mid-summit, leaving the G7's economic roundtable with an empty U.S. chair and 6 worried allies. Prime Minister Mark Carney filled the vacuum within hours, sprinting through back-to-back meetings in Kananaskis that stitched together a safe supply food corridor from the Canadian prairies to European and Asian ports. 2 days later, Brussels fired its opening shot. Starting 15 April 2025, the European Union slapped a 25% tariff on U.S. corn. Grain traders say the levy will tack roughly €2 billion onto Europe's annual feed bill and force buyers to lock in Canadian grain instead. The timing could not be worse for American farmers. Customs data show the EU had already sucked in 3.4 million metric tons of U.S. corn since July 2024, the biggest haul in a decade. That window just slammed shut, and Chicago futures responded by sliding under the $4 line for the first time since 2020, a price many Iowa elevators describe as below break-even. Meanwhile, Canada is cashing the geopolitical dividend. Carney's office says new term contracts signed during the summit will guarantee at least 12 million tons of prairie grain to Japan, Germany, and Italy through 2027. Officials in Ottawa call the volumes ironclad against tariff shock. The structural damage is already visible in Washington's ledgers. USDA forecasters now peg the fiscal year agricultural trade gap at roughly $49 billion, the largest on record and a direct flip from the surplus officials predicted 3 years ago. Put bluntly, America's Farm Belt isn't losing a price war. It is losing a trust war. And unless the White House rewrites its tariff playbook fast, the world's most reliable breadbasket may watch its oldest customers swap the stars and stripes for a maple leaf, contract by contract, season by season. The domino of lost confidence keeps rolling. Trade flows shifted in weeks, not months. Statistics Canada reports that in May 2025, Canadian exports to countries other than the United States jumped 5.7% to a record high, even as shipments south of the border continued to shrink. Freight desks in Hamburg and Yokohama now write Canada origin only into tender paperwork, sidestepping the White House's next tweet before it strikes. London is doing the same. A June 2025 fact sheet from the UK Department for Business and Trade shows British imports from Canada rising 22.8% in 2024, with soybeans among the fastest growing lines. That surge puts Ottawa ahead of Brazil on the list of Britain's non-EU farm suppliers for the first time this century. The trend stretches across the Pacific. Sask wheat data revealed Japan bought 261,000 metric tons of Canadian wheat in March 2025, its largest March draw since 2018, sealing term contracts that run through the Osaka Expo. All of this is happening while U.S. elevators groan under record stockpiles and Chicago futures languish below the $4 break-even line. European millers call the extra tariff a risk premium. Asian buyers describe Canadian supply as ironclad against headline shock. Washington's tariff strategy was supposed to force partners back to the table. Instead, it has driven them to Calgary boardrooms and Thunder Bay loading berths. Unless the White House rewrites that playbook fast, America's Farm Belt will keep surrendering contracts, one tender, one season, one ally at a time. The camera stays on those overstuffed elevators, and the numbers get worse. On June 30th, 2025, the USDA's grain stocks report confirmed what the drone shots already hinted. Chicago's July corn contract scraped $4.08 a bushel on July 3rd. The nearby September slipped to $4.08 as well. Traders have not seen prices this low, with supplies this bloated, since the trade war slump of 2020. Cash values in the plains are even uglier. A Kansas Farm Bureau briefing in April warned that feed grain basis was running 30 to 80 cents weaker than the 5-year norm. That gap is squeezing on-farm cash flow just as loan renewals hit the mailbox. Elevator managers now stack grain on asphalt. That improvisation costs real money. Insurance surcharges, plastic tarps, fumigation crews, and every extra dime comes straight off the farmer's check. The liquidity crunch is spreading. Co-op directors in Salina report growers deferring fertilizer and seed bills, hoping for a harvest rally that may never arrive. Local banks whisper about watch lists for 5-figure operating notes, something they have not done since 2019. Producers are demanding a lifeline, and they want it in steel rather than subsidies. On June 25th, the Kansas Corn Growers Association joined a chorus of farm groups. They urged tax credits for additional silo capacity. They argued that new storage is cheaper than selling below cost. State lawmakers are drafting a fast-track bill, but construction crews cannot pour concrete before winter. Every day the bins stay full, Canada prints new contracts. Tokyo took more than 260,000 tons of prairie wheat in March. London's soy crushers just lifted another cargo off Vancouver for August. Even German feed mills, traditionally loyal to the Gulf Coast, now route half their tenders through Thunder Bay. This is no price cycle. It is a confidence hemorrhage. As long as U.S. tariffs hang over every shipment like a loaded trapdoor, importers will keep buying peace of mind under a maple leaf. The question is not who blinks first. It is how many family farms run out of cash before Washington blinks at all. Canada and Mexico have just redrawn the North American farm map, and they barely needed Washington's permission. On May 15, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney flew to Mexico City and stood shoulder to shoulder with President Claudia Sheinbaum. Cameras rolled as the two leaders pledged to turbocharge agricultural trade inside the USMCA, effectively inviting prairie grain and prairie beef to skip U.S. railheads and head straight to Mexican tables. Ottawa backed that promise with real cash. On 7 March 2025, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland unveiled a $6.5 billion Canadian dollar credit program. The program lets Canadian shippers lock in low-interest loans, insure cargoes, and bankroll new cold chain hubs from Veracruz to Valparaiso. She called it a safety net for exporters chasing markets America can no longer guarantee. The money is already moving steel. Swiss logistics giant Quany plus Nagel told Reuters on 18th March it will open a 150-door cross-dock in Laredo, Texas, because the surge of Canada to Mexico freight is clogging customs lanes built for U.S. grain. Executives say the site exists for one reason. Tariffs have turned routine border checks into two-day traffic jams, and buyers can't risk soy meal arriving warm. Every delay hands Ottawa another customer. Since April, Mexican feed mills have rerouted more than 600,000 tons of corn contracts away from the Gulf Coast and onto Canadian rail cars linking Saskatchewan to the port of Prince Rupert. Wheat is following the same track, with Vancouver shipping schedules now booked solid through February 2026. The geopolitical optics are brutal for Washington. The USMCA was drafted to deepen continental integration under an American lead. Instead, tariff volatility has flipped the script. Canada supplies, Mexico refines, and the United States watches trucks laden with prairie grain speed past idle Iowa elevators. Carney calls the new axis a maple cactus alliance. Mexican officials prefer insurance against tariff shock. Either way, the numbers point one direction. Canada's farm exports to Mexico rose 14% in the first 5 months of 2025, while U.S. shipments slumped 9%. If that gap widens through harvest, America won't just lose market share, it will surrender the supply chain trust that took a century to build. With G7 customers already defecting to the maple leaf, the next 6 months hinge on one question. Does Washington blink or double down? If the White House accepts the offer Brussels will table in August, a universal 10% tariff cap, EU leaders say they will scrap the 25% levy on U.S. corn. The levy has quietly rippled through Europe's farm economy, tightening margins and triggering a wave of discontent from feed mills to parliament floors. Futures would bounce and Canada's cost edge would narrow, but the concession would have to be extended to Japan and Mexico, opening a fresh political front at home. Hold the line and the glut grows. USDA models show 2025 harvest stocks could clear 5.8 billion bushels, the biggest pile since the 2020 trade war slump. That oversupply is pushing cash bids deeper below break-even and shoving more Midwest farms toward loan workouts. Ottawa is ready. In March, it deployed a $6.5 billion Canadian dollar credit arsenal that lets shippers finance low-interest loans and build cold chain hubs clear to Veracruz, insulating prairie grain from any price war. Escalation is a nightmare. If tariffs spread to fertilizer and farm machinery, IMF research shows 45% of every fertilizer price shock feeds straight into global cereal costs within 4 quarters. That dynamic would turn today's glut into tomorrow's food price spiral. Each headline out of Washington now nudges the dial among these 3 futures. Harvest begins in 8 weeks. The clock is louder than the rhetoric. $9 billion export dollars have vaporized in 6 weeks. 5 G7 partners now fly a maple leaf on contracts that once bore the stars and stripes. America's farm belt is sitting on the biggest grain hill since the trade war slump, yet buyers are queuing in Vancouver, not New Orleans. Canada wins by doing the simplest thing in trade, delivering on time. If Washington cannot rebuild trust fast, the next headline will not ask who buys U.S. corn, but how many Midwest acres go fallow. From here, the script can flip 2 ways. The White House could cap tariffs and claw back market share, or double down and watch prairie rail cars hoover up every tender left on the table. Either path rewrites North America's food chain. So what cracks first? Politics in D.C. or patience on the farm?